Hi, Linnea. Please tell me you can hear me now.
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. That's fantastic.
Okay. For a second, there was a pause. I was like, oh no, it's me. It's me.
Let me in. Let me in. Okay. So I am recording you on Zoom and on whatchamacallit, QuickTime.
Okay.
And hopefully that should work just okay. Great. But the proper way to do this would be to start with making sure you had time to look at the informed consent I had sent and everything looks good to you. I know you read it because you're teasing me about quitting the research already. Hopefully nothing comes to that. But I just wanted to go over a couple quick things. Make sure that the process makes sense to you. 3 interviews, all over Zoom. Looks like we're not going to be meeting in person later this month, but hopefully eventually, maybe in March. And you know that you're able to withdraw anytime you'd like, and you are clear on what the process would be like. You know that if you have any questions about the research process, you can reach out to me, or you can reach out directly to Tessa, who can talk to the rest of the research advisory board. You're aware that I'm recording this right now, just audio, but potentially video if and when we meet in person. And you know that I'll have a recording of this for on my computer 30 days after my fellowship is over. I will delete it, and ILSR will hold on to a copy for about a year. But the process will always be the same. If they're gonna quote you, if I'm gonna quote you in any way, I will run the quote by you and make sure you're comfortable with how you're being presented and what words of yours I'm actually using. So that nothing is being misused. And I think that is everything. Did you have any questions or concerns about anything that you read in the informed consent process?
No, I did read that. You did mention that we might not be meeting in person until March or so. So does that mean that the boot camp is being postponed?
I think so. Like I haven't heard properly,
Yeah.
just in texts from Chris, because I have my baby is just about a year old now. She's actually a year and 3 days. And I had texted him to say, like, I don't know about this Omicron, man. The daycare is closed. I don't know if I can do this boot camp in a few weeks. And he was like, yeah, I don't think it's going to happen. So that's much as I know. I think there's going to
Okay.
be proper communication soon.
Okay. Yeah. I was just curious about that. I was watching the Today Show this morning, drinking coffee, and all of the travel closures and cancellations, and it just seems like a nightmare.
Really does.
Okay.
Okay. We can get started if you're ready.
Perfect.
Great. So to start with, can you tell me a little bit about the history of the Hoopa Valley tribe and your relationship to the land that you're currently on?
Sure. So obviously, our inception story is that we were always from here. There's been carbon dating of fire pits that go back, at least 10,000 years. So we were one of, you think about like, Christopher Columbus coming over and quote unquote discovering America in 1492. We had a way later, I think probably due to our location, because we didn't even sign a treaty until like 1868, I believe. So that's 400 years after kind of the East Coast expansion and then westward push, removing them from their lands. We were one of the only tribes that haven't been removed from our quote unquote Aboriginal territories. Although we're located right along the West Coast, we're kind of in deep pockets of highly dense forested trees. And even to get to the coast, it might seem like an hour drive, which doesn't seem like much, but you're going up and over 2 mountain ranges, up and over 3,000 feet. So it was really hard to get in here with the dense foliage, the mountain ranges, and the small passes. So as far as, tribes go in the history of that with the United States government, we kind of had late contact. And there were fur trappers and, the gold rush that hit California, that was pretty devastating. So it wasn't really until like the late 1800s where we had, let's call it, first contact. Fast forward with that, I think Ulysses S. Grant was the president at the time, and we didn't necessarily sign a treaty, but we were issued an executive order, which established the quote unquote boundaries of our territory. Our Aboriginal territory obviously is a lot larger than what was allocated, but we do have the main footprint of where our village sites were, and we've been here ever since.
Got it. So now tell me a little bit about yourself, and how you came to work on broadband access.
Okay, so I was born here in Hoopa. My mother received or got a nursing degree, and at the time she could work with the Indian Health Service in various satellite locations across the country. So I was actually raised in Anchorage, Alaska, and I came back to California to go to college, and then I lived in LA for a period of time, and I just wasn't around my family enough. I was seeing them, with your 2-week vacation that you get per year, I was seeing them maybe twice a year, including my mom, and it just wasn't enough. So I came back and I started working for the tribe at Hoopa Land Management, which is basically the Tribal Environmental Protection Agency and Realty. So with that becomes a lot of interactions for things that are affected on the land base, whether that's your tribal trust property, your allotments, or your fee properties. And the tribe owns various lands held in all of those statuses. So it's kind of a large, the Hoopa Valley tribe has one of the largest land bases in the state of California. So there's, depending on which statistics you're looking at, there could be about 170 recognized as well as unrecognized tribes in the state, which is the largest of any state in the United States. So Hoopa has one of the largest land base in California. So when the scenic grant, which is the California Educational Network, issued a grant to the school district, it was for a dark fiber line from one of their satellite schools in Willow Creek into Hoopa, which is an 11-mile stretch. So that's the Klamath Trinity Joint Unified School District. And that was our first experience with having fiber built into the valley. This was a new experience. Yes, it was dark fiber, but at least it would start that progression of getting fiber into the valley. And that was provided by a grant, so there was really no cost to the tribe. Where I came in is that the company that received the grant to build the fiber, I don't think had any concept of tribal consultation, of land status or jurisdiction. And so they were kind of just behaving like, oh, we're here to build and this is what we're doing, without ever speaking with the tribe. There's right-of-ways, there's consents, there's 106 TIPO consultation that's required, and none of that was being done. And so that was in February of 18 that I kind of stepped in to help in that project. There was a large learning curve there because I believe once you hit the reservation boundaries, it completely changes jurisdiction and the form and process that they would have to go through to obtain right-of-ways. They should be working with the tribe. Any ground disturbance, there would have to be our TIPO officer involved for cultural resource impacts. The environmental and the biological assessments that would need to be done. And none of that was really being done at the time. And I think it's more a lack of ignorance And I'm not saying that in a negative way, but it was just completely not understanding or knowing. And then there was a state highway that went through in 1933. So largely they were building the fiber down the highway. So in their minds, they were just receiving permits through either Caltrans or PG&E and Frontier, and not really consulting with the tribe at all. So we kind of went through some growing pains with that. And then we were working with that company. I believe they have good intentions, but again, it was just not knowing the process or not saying, hey, when you have this build, realize that you're working on federal tribal land. And I really feel like the granting agency probably should have said that, but again, it's just like a lack of process there.
Mm.
So fast forward, the fiber line was built from Willow Creek into Hoopaw from school district to school district office, but that was a 12-mile stretch that built that dark fiber. At the time I was working in realty as well, and we knew that the benefit, even though we didn't have a high-speed provider, we knew that the benefit would be there. So I was able to secure money from some of the larger districts, that being the Housing Authority, the Roads Department, Tribal Council, Land Management, Public Utilities. And then the tribal council paid for the other half of the fiber build. And then what we did was we connected 41 tribal departments with fiber as what we're calling kind of a phase 2. So phase 1 was the school district build into Hoopaw. Phase 2 would be the fiber build to tribal departments. And we're currently in phase 3, which is a California Public Utilities Commission grant through their CASA funds, which is the California Advanced Services Fund. And so we are in the middle of implementing that grant that was received, which continues the fiber build.
And where does the, what's the best way? CASA funds? Is that what I should call it?
Yeah, I would say CASA funds, which is just CASF.
Okay. So, and the CASA funds covers what? The network will be built to residential?
So CASA funds, and I don't know if you're interested in me showing you maps.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Mm.
So CASA funds provide some of the wireless infrastructure. So I mentioned that we don't have a high-speed internet provider here through fiber. There is just no fiber either coming from the coast, coming from inland, or coming from up north. So we're kind of in this like little middle island section where in the next, I would say 3 years, we will have bridged several projects.
Hmm.
And then the high-speed provider will then come through either one of those locations. But right now we have a microwave backhaul.
Mhm.
And I will pull up a couple of maps that might help. Okay. Cast of KMZ. I think having a visual really provides kind of insight rather than just like conceptualizing it. Okay. Pull this up real quick.
So right now, or at least in 2018, the internet service on the reservation was microwave backhaul, all wireless connectivity. What kind of speeds were you getting? And so who was the provider? Who were you paying and how much was it costing?
So there's a couple of providers and there's also satellite options. So the satellite options are the HughesNets, the Viasats, which was Exceed at one time. So there was those 2 satellite providers. And then the wireless providers, there was a local firm out of Weaverville called Velocity. There was AT&T, but they only had one distribution point, which is on Bald Hill, and it'll make a little bit more sense when I show you this. Let me pull up the sites. It's hard when over the period of years you develop all of these different KMZ files. Okay, almost there. District structures. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen if you don't mind.
Yes, please.
Okay, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can kind of get the perception. So right here is the North Coast. This is the Eureka Arcata location. And we are inland across Highway 299 right here.
Mhm.
It takes about an hour to get there. In a small town called Willow Creek, this is kind of where the story begins. So at this location right here is Trinity Valley Elementary School, and it's part of the Klamath Trinity Joint Unified School District. So the first portion of the build, which we called phase 1, is this red fiber line. It's meandering through mountain, territories. It's a very narrow highway. It's a pretty tough build.
Mhm.
So all of this red was the fiber installed through phase 1. When you get to this Tishtang campground, this is kind of where the reservation line hits, kind of where my mouse is moving. That's when you start coming into tribal land. So as you see, they kept meandering down the highway because of pole failure. When they do pole analysis, they have to ensure that that pole can handle additional load or capacity. When the pole is failed, they have to go another route. So they place these hunter-owned poles, and that's kind of why you see this loop here, because the poles along this highway couldn't support additional infrastructure, and the tribe gave a right-of-way on this tribal trust portion. So we came down all the way down Highway 96, and this is through Hoopa, and here's the high school, the
Mhm.
elementary school, and then the district office. And that's where phase 1 stops. So that largely came all the way into Willow Creek, down Highway 96, that's phase 1. What you kind of see in purple is phase 2. And that was where the tribe paid for the dark fiber internet to 41 tribal departments. As you can see, the purple line ends right here at Hostler Field Housing, and that's where the current fiber ends. So it basically just goes from Willow Creek all the way into Hoopa to the school district to 41 tribal departments, and then it stops. There's no high-speed internet that lights it up until we came along. So CASIF will provide the middle mile infrastructure in this lime green all the way down 96, and it'll hit Witchpeck. Right about right here is where you hit the Yurok tribe's reservation line. So it'll bridge 2 projects, because the Karuk tribe and the Yurok tribe are partnering on what's called Kirby, which is the Klamath River Rural Broadband Initiative. And they are building an east-west fiber line from Siskiyou County over here all the way to the coast. So there'll be that east-west fiber line. Sometimes there's wireless hops depending on, because there's rivers and things they have to cross, but largely that will be a high-speed internet backbone coming from east to west, and we will interconnect there. So that will be one other, area of redundancy where we can get additional bandwidth. We can support each other as tribes. So that's segment 1 of CASIF. Segment goes all the way down Pine Creek to the existing Bald Hill Tower. And mind you, they're attaching to existing poles. So largely there's no ground disturbance, but there will be poles having to be set on each of these lines. And right now, this Bald Hill cell tower is where the Verizons, the AT&Ts, the other wireless people, this is their only distribution point for the valley. So that's pretty if you look at the valley topography, they're not going to hit everybody in these nooks and crannies. And so
Yeah.
that's where wireless providers kind of fail to meet the valley's needs.
Is all of the CASA funding going to be aerial fiber?
Yes.
Okay.
That is something that we slightly regret now, but that would have completely changed the project because there would have been so much more ground disturbance and it would have kicked in kind of a NEPA process. And the aerial has been good, except when there's snowstorms and there are trees that fall and there's rock slides and there's wildfires. So we are faced with all of those different winter storm events.
Yeah.
So
are you guys getting snow today?
we're not getting snow today, but we had probably one of the largest storms we've had in years. There's still people without power and won't receive power for maybe another week or so. So that will be like several weeks of people without power when it's like super cold outside.
Yikes.
Uh-huh.
What's the time frame on the CASF work?
So the CASF work, because it was CEQA exempt, meaning there wasn't going to be ground disturbance, it was attaching to already existing infrastructure. The time frame for that was supposed to be completed within 1 year, which is pretty lofty.
Yeah, that is. I mean, that seems like a lot of terrain to cover.
It's a lot of terrain to cover. And then so they did request an extension. So technically it's supposed to be completed by March of 23,
Okay.
which will come very quickly.
March of 23. When you say they requested an extension, who is they?
Okay, so originally the Hoopa Valley Public Utilities, I'd like to explain that structure a little bit if I could.
Yes, please.
So the Hoopa Valley tribe has probably 60 different entities, businesses, and departments. The Hoopa Valley Public Utilities is a chartered entity of the tribe. So obviously we're under their umbrella, but we're largely separate. We do our own accounting and payroll. We have our own board of directors. So we don't necessarily have to go to the council all the time for approvals. Instead, we go to our 5-member elected board that are elected by the tribe. So we're a separate entity of the tribe, which gives us a little more freedom and flexibility to secure grants, to go after things as an independent entity.
Got it.
Yeah. So the last section in CASF right here is this little green section. So this is Kamal Medical Center. The purple is what already was built with to the 41 departments, including this line to the medical center. So we have, our diabetes clinic, our finance, our dentists, things over here. And then this lime green is the last segment in CASF. So there were those 3 middle mile segments, the one to Witchpeck to the Yurok tribe, the one to the Bald Hill Cell Tower, and the one to complete this build to meet these residents. That's the middle mile infrastructure for the CASF grant. Now I would like to show you our point-to-point towers so you can see how crazy it is to get actual internet here. Okay. So again, we start on the coast. There's a tower called Humboldt Hill, and there's like this Keat Radio Television that has a tower, which we have a lease on. So we have a point-to-point from Humboldt Hill to Kneeland, and then we have a Kneeland to Horse Mountain Hop. This Horse Mountain Hop, there's about, I would say, 8 to 10 communications towers up there of various lengths, heights, and like how professionally they're built. So the saturation of frequency up here is pretty much maxed out. So we have from Horse Mountain, we have built a new tower on Sugar Pine, which I can show you pictures of. And that was a huge benefit because before that we were using a Office of Emergency Services small roan tower, And with the CASA funds, we were able to build like a 150-foot communications tower. It is off grid, but we do have generators. We have 2 propane tanks, solar and battery backup. So that's been pretty resilient, and that was an amazing thing to be able to build. This is on reservation land. This is where you hit the reservation. So that's the backhaul between those 3 major towers, and you can see if anyone linked those wrong, you know, it's quite the distance.
Yeah.
So once Sugar Pine gets its signal, it shoots down to the Rhodes Tower, Water Tower, and then the Bald Hill Tower. So largely, we've been able to serve a lot more of the valley because we have those 3 distribution points.
Mhm.
And then we started to build one. We have a tribal radio that has a small tower. So we're doing kind of a micro pop experiment to see if we can get to some of these downtown businesses. There's the grocery store, the mini mart, the casino, things like that, where we definitely needed to be able to provide them service.
How many
So
subscribers are you serving at the moment?
right now, about 150.
Okay.
So in 1 year, we're not quite at the projection that we need though to be self-sustaining. So one thing that was a learning, a growing pain when you're learning this process is we didn't negotiate when we were building the tribal dark internet, what it would be like when we wanted to light that up with our own internet. So right now we're paying a managed circuit fee for every single site at $90 per month with no internet. And so that's quite expensive.
Sorry, can you explain that to me?
Sure.
Yeah.
So for the 41 tribal departments that are hooked up through the fiber,
The dark fiber.
the dark fiber, each of those locations is paying a $90 managed fee
For
per
nothing.
correct. But if the weather takes the system down, like we had a home have a fire, it burnt the cable, they come down and they replace and fix that. And that's kind of covered in the management fees.
Got it.
But when we now have our backhaul, which was quite the task of aligning it, making sure that all of the radio frequencies were working, it was quite the overhaul and expense to get these towers in place. Now we want to light the fiber up to those tribal businesses, and they want us to pay a $30 per month UPL fee, which is like Ethernet private line for each of those locations as well. So that would bring the cost up for each site to $120 per month without internet. Mm-hmm. And those are just some of the things that we are having a problem with, because, you know, how can we support that? And then trying to sell that to each department and saying, you know, this would be the benefit, is going to be kind of a hard sell, but we're working through that. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of our system right now. Hunter Community, oh yeah, you asked me a question about who's they. So Hunter Communications was the one that originally received the original Scenic grant. And that's how we became working with them since February of 18. Then we kind of partnered them or hired them to complete the build to the tribal departments. And originally, Public Utilities was going to be the grantee on the CASA funds. But for various reasons of us not having certain statuses as a provider like Hunter did, we decided that they would be the grantee, and they were awarded the grant, and we're kind of quote unquote subcontractors under that. So we built this tower there. So that was a part of, you know, the wireless upgrades. We've installed customers. So in the last year, you know, we now have 150 customers. That will increase once we are able to light all the departments up.
Got it. And right now, what would a monthly subscriber be paying?
So residential people are paying 75 for the premium service or $40 for a basic service. And the businesses will pay 200, and the larger entities that need a lot of bandwidth or have, hundreds of employees are paying like the $1,000 per month.
Okay.
But there's only a handful of those, like our medical center and the tribal, the main tribal offices, things like that.
Yeah.
But mostly the businesses are paying 200. But it's really expensive for these tower fees and to get the internet in here.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what the overhead cost is, we have to have a lease for three different towers, plus the cost, to maintain everything and then get the internet feed into the valley.
Yeah. So can you, to finish on this topic, which is, do you mind explaining to me why the public utility couldn't be the grantor for the CASA funds? Like, what was the threshold that you didn't meet according to them?
So I think they wanted the providers to have like ETC status or like a CLEC status. And because this whole tribal broadband thing is kind of new, allowing tribes to, run your own little provider service. So Hunter Communications, as an established company out of Southern Oregon, already had that status, and they had already applied in California because they've grown into this market as well, especially in Northern California. Mm-hmm. So they had that status and were applying for the ETC, which they've now received.
Great.
So there were some benefits of them as already being an established provider with those different scenarios.
Okay. So you mentioned that you came back home, but you didn't. Do you have a technical background? How do you know all of this?
So I guess it's like trial by fire, as they said. This wasn't something that I necessarily was skilled in when I came here. But I knew the importance. I had a land background. Mm-hmm. So with that, you start to learn about, the right of ways of this. What are the section 106? There's cultural, there's biological. So it was like a natural progression to kind of learn all of the different steps. And at that time, I was kind of working hand in hand with their field engineer to see how to actually build this. So there's different crews that'll come in. I think it was something that I picked up naturally. It wasn't something I necessarily had the skill set coming in with that, though. So I would say it's kind of been a 4-year progression. And then on the administrative side, now I have a broadband manager and 3 broadband techs. And so, largely I'm reliant on them. I'm not the one that's going to go out and, install and get on the roof and do the installs, but there's also a whole layer of bureaucracy when it comes to submitting for grants, being in that world, being able to maneuver and kind of explain why tribes need, and we also have the capacity to be able to do this on our own. Mm-hmm. And changing kind of that political climate of that. So I would say I had that skill set.
Yeah.
The technical, especially with no fiber being in the valley, it was just something that I've learned as a natural progression over the last 4 years.
Yeah. Can you speak a little bit more about why you think it's important for the tribes to be doing this work themselves?
I think it's so important because I think largely we know the area. So coming from the public utilities, we already serve almost every single home in this valley with water anyway. We know their location, we know the homes, we know what kind of the scenarios of where they're built. I think it's so important because we're serving our own people in our own community. So there's you're kind of more invested in that. I think people know the lay of the land a little bit better, what it takes. So for instance, we've had this major storm and we had Verizon and AT&T out because they didn't come and fill their generators. And it's like, well, we would know all of those things and we could handle that ourselves, but they definitely need to communicate. So again, this is on Bald Hill Tower. You may not be able to see it, but there's a 150-foot tower there with all these providers. There's like the Sheriff's Department, AT&T, T-Mobile, Verizon, all of those major providers up here, including us. But I think tribes have the capability of doing that. I think if we allow, these larger companies to come in, you lose control, you lose that personal touch of serving your own people and understanding the importance of it and the impacts that it'll have, especially on our school district, on tribal business, economic development. I think we know more about that than anybody in our own economy.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Are there other grants that you are currently applying for? So we've mostly talked about the relationship with the California. Are there federal grants that you're working on?
So one thing that was disturbing was that Hunter was acquired by a larger company called Grain Management, and they applied for the RDOF census blocks. And they were actually awarded RDOF in our area for these specific areas, including Willow Creek. Even though it was federal funds, it didn't require any tribal consultation, which was odd to me. And we didn't necessarily know that they were even applying for those. So RDOF is supposed to be fiber to the home. So we've talked about these middle mile portions and how that can be, but that doesn't necessarily serve each drop location or doesn't serve each home. So they received RDOF funding as well, but it allows them to build out this valley over like an 8-year period, which is just insane because that would be like 2 different people going through high school, 2 generations of kids going through high school before like that was supposed to be scheduled to be built. And I can kind of show you some of these RDOF blocks. So it's really weird how this works because sometimes like the purple is the RDOF. And what they had to do was carve out the pieces that were awarded through CASIF, like because they weren't going to do double funding. So all of these little things are, different census blocks. So Hunter was awarded RDOF, but we don't necessarily want them to build out over 8 years. We'd rather do it ourselves. So we did submit for NTIA, which is the National Telecommunications Administration, Information Administration. And this is kind of part of our overlay, but we would like to do fiber to the home ourselves, or at least with contractors. So we've submitted to build additional communications towers that would help us upgrade our telemed and our telehealth infrastructure. It would provide fiber to the home. It would provide free internet, for the community for X number of years. And we've already secured, vendors, if not Hunter, to build that out ourselves. They gave us they gave a year for it to be completed, which is pretty crazy when these are multi-million-dollar grant applications. But they did said that there would be an opportunity to secure an extension, especially with progress payments and, staying on track of the project. They were supposed to have decided those. So HOOPA actually submitted for the 2 different types of of the grant. So there was like broadband use and adoption, which has to be completed within 1 year. And then there's the infrastructure project. So HOOPA submitted for both of those for a total of, I think, $82 million. Now, NTIA allocated 1 billion, and over across Indian country, a total of like 5 billion was submitted for. So it shows the great need that's there. Which is basically like 5 times of what they're allocating for. The different tribes are saying, hey, we have a need here. This is what we'd like to build, because no one knows your own topography like yourselves. They were supposed to have decided those awards last month, and then they came back and said, well, we really need till the springtime to decide. So I've kind of been patiently waiting as to hear back, because there was supposed to be 3 rounds of review. And I've only received 1 correspondence yet thus far. I'm sure with that dollar ask, they're going to, want to know more in depth about the project. How capable are we of pulling that off? And I think with strong partners, which we do have lined up, we would have the ability to complete those on our own.
Yeah.
So the NTIA is a large one, and we're kind of waiting with bated breath on, what's going to be funded. I'm not sure how they're going to pick those applications apart, and pick and choose maybe what they want to fund within that. So I don't know that process yet. And then with the infrastructure bill that was passed, I heard that there was an additional 2 billion that was allocated for broadband. I don't know if they're going to smush it with the original, 1 billion, because there was such a large ask, or how they're going to implement that funding, but we will definitely be going after that, because even from when we submitted that application, we definitely need additional bandwidth. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned these tower sites being oversaturated in that frequency. So we can only get 1 gig through here, and we probably need additional. So part of that would be to get additional bandwidth. So if there's a new process to submit for the new infrastructure money, we're going to submit for that as well.
And the bandwidth, the frequency you're talking about is?
So at Horse Mountain, this is where I mentioned that there's probably 10 different towers here, and you can't quite see them in this view, but each of these has a communication tower. Mm-hmm. And when you're up there, we're actually on this tower. I know it's hard to see, but this whole area, the whole frequency is either the licenses are taken, or there's such saturation in there that you have to be really mindful of not interfering with additional frequencies, because you have some major providers up there, the AT&Ts, Verizons of the world, that type of thing. So this is the only tower within this area that can hit Sugar Pine, which is on the reservation. Mm-hmm. So there's, with there's only a couple of towers, your options are limited. So since we were able to build this new tower on reservation land, there's an option of us being able to hit from Neeland to here. So before we were using a small roan tower, now we have this 150-foot tower that's a couple of 100 feet north of the other one. So we have an option of securing frequency from here to here, which will give us additional bandwidth. And we didn't submit for that in the original grant. And that's part of developing a WISP, is that we quickly realized we need additional bandwidth. Mm-hmm. And we quickly learned that with these distribution towers, you can only have so many customers per sector. Mm-hmm. And literally that was a growing pain and a hard lesson that we learned within the last month.
Yeah.
Because this is called Campbellfield, and this is one of the most densely populated areas. You have a housing facility here. So, you have all these houses, there's apartment buildings, there's new homes, and then there's residents throughout. So this Rhodes Tower right now is already oversaturated.
Mm,
And we necessarily weren't told, oh, you can only have 24 customers per sector. You have X number of sectors. This is how many clients you can have. And so that was something that we've had to learn along the way. NTIA will build a communications tower up here
mm,
and have direct line of sight to multiple areas. And it will largely help this oversaturation area.
mm.
So that's really critical for us to build up there. We've already worked with our typical officer and our forestry department because tribal forestry, so the reservation is kind of like a square and it kind of goes like this.
Mhm.
So anything in the forested area outside of the valley floor is managed by tribal forestry under the forest management plan. So anything up in the hills, they would have approval of, and they've already kind of said that we can build up there, you know, within reason.
Got it.
So those are the things that like make it critical for NTIA and for future funding for tribes to be able to build your own towers and
Yeah.
know what frequency and what areas need more assistance, because that would also help the telephones, Office of Emergency Services, and largely this area is kind of a dead zone for cell phones, so it would update telecommunications as well.
So I know that we're getting close to our time out, and I know that you had a meeting right after this, so I don't want to overstep. Since we lost some time, I had some questions around like the third section of the interview guide that I had for this conversation was around like, where are you getting help from? What are the roadblocks? Sort of like external stuff that is external to your work, how it interacts with it, where the help is coming from. Do you think I could schedule another time with you in this week or next week sometime, so that we could do the second half of this, or the last portion of this interview?
So do you have to go?
Oh, I don't.
Okay, so my 11 a.m. was rescheduled.
Ah, cool. Excellent. Then we can keep going. Great. Okay. So talk to me about this learning experience. Like where have you gone for support, and what have, outside the hard knocks of things not going as you would like them to go, beyond that, where have you gone for support and knowledge in doing this work?
So I would say I couldn't have done this without various consultants. Hoopa partnered with a native group called Intertribe, and they, who is owned by Forrest James. And I couldn't have done it without his team, because his team will have, you know, the administrative side, they will have the RF engineers, they will have the network people. He has someone that comes out and does the tower climbs and the actual the builds on the ground. So it's not just him that does that, but he has a team that he can pull from, which we couldn't have done without. So he also has someone that does like the electrical, meaning like the generators, the battery systems, the solar panels. So he kind of has a full team that whatever aspect it is, because they're all different disciplines. And so I think that's what's kind of helped me, is that I get a little bit from everybody. So I get, you know, the business owner admin side from Forrest, who knows a ton. You get, you know, experience with the RF engineers. You get some of the experience from the network engineers, the actual on the ground project management, actual builds. So I'm talking about hoisting up radios on these towers and ice bridges that are needing to be installed. It was really impressive to kind of see how that all comes together. But if we didn't have a competent consultant with all of those teams to help not only teach us, but guide us and provide support along this way, it wouldn't have been possible.
how did you, how has your work been received by the tribal government? Like, how did you build the buy-in from everyone to be like, okay, yeah, we're going to spend the money to connect those 41 tribal departments to start with? That's a big outlay of funding.
It was huge. I want to say that was like $400,000. Um, that was a tough sell, let me tell you. It was a tough sell, especially when it wasn't like immediately they're like, oh, we have the fiber coming in, we're gonna have awesome internet. It doesn't work like that. It's just the actual line that could bring that potential capability. But I think it took with phase one, which was the scenic build, it took some massaging, and that kind of got them acquainted with the project. This is what fiber optics does. This is how it's going to be built. This is the timeline for that to happen. So I think it was like informing them and educating them at the same time, and allowing them to be kind of present in the process. It's also having that trust of your tribal leadership and your tribal departments that can see the benefit. So once you have the buy-in on that, then you largely have support. So at the time, it was hard to get the funding because I think housing contributed like $50,000. Tribal roads contributed some, public utilities, land management. They knew that this valley needed updated communications. So I think everyone kind of was on that same mindset. But I think it's been hard because, so another thing that I forgot to mention is that we did receive CARES funding. When I say we, I mean public utilities. So the tribe received CARES funding along with all the other tribes in the country. And we submitted a tribal survey of adult tribal members. What are your highest needs here? And when COVID hit, school shut down. People were not working. Public utilities is kind of an essential department. So there were those of us through COVID that continued to work. So largely, if your child doesn't have any daycare, how can the parents be at work? So that created not only a complete breakdown of your school system, but also of your workforce. And we were allocated $2 million. I would say largely 1 million of it was for infrastructure, because you had to cover staffing. You had to build kind of a broadband office. So there were some other hidden costs in that, but I would think that we spent about $1 million, purchasing subscriber radios, the modems, the internet feed, the tower improvements that needed to be in place. $1 million, especially for a smaller tribe, is a ton of money, but we largely and quickly knew we needed more funds. It just wasn't going to cover it. So I think one thing that has been really hard is that in the last year and a half, we've been able to not only secure and shore up this complete backhaul. So we've had to have climbers and hire consultants at each of these locations, make sure that they were aligned correctly, have our leases in place, install UPSs. So this area largely has electric outages, whether that's weather related or like PSPS events. I don't know if you have those there, but it's a public safety power shutoff. So PG&E will shut off grid lines in large areas if there's like wildfire, or if there's conditions that would present itself, they'll shut the whole power down. So we needed to make sure that our system wasn't going to go down. So, there's UPS, there's generators, there's solar, there's things that we had to adapt. Well, so my point in saying that was we had 1.5 years to completely develop this whole system. And with any new business or startup, there's going to be issues. And I don't know if you want to talk about this at another time, but when the FCC awarded the 2.5 tribal priority frequency, I submitted for that as well. And it seemed like this amazing thing, like the FCC was going to open up this frequency to tribes where normally they would be auctioned off for large amounts of money. So we received the 2.5 frequency as a license, and we purchased equipment from Cambium to be able to utilize that frequency to provide the internet. What we didn't realize was that we were 1.0 of their build within that frequency, like their first beta version of that, because it was new within the communications realm. Well, with any first, let's call it a first draft of any equipment, or there were large issues with that. With their equipment in that frequency. So obviously, if people are having issues with their service, it was supposed to also be able to reach through dense foliage and around trees, and it was supposed to be kind of perfect for our environment. And there were issues within its firmware and software and the modems, and that wasn't something that we could control. They would try to recreate those issues in the lab. But since then, there's been various upgrades that are supposed to fix each issue until we finally get there. But we didn't know, nor did we know to ask, what version of your equipment are you on? Have you tested this in the lab? What kind of bugs are you seeing? These are the things that, after hindsight's 2020, we didn't know to ask then.
Yeah.
We do now, but it's been a hard lesson to learn.
Is that just this particular company,
Cambium?
Cambium. I kept wanting to say cadmium. Is it just that particular company, or is that, do you think, more relevant to a bunch of new technology working in 2.5?
I would say both. I would say both, because Cambium, they were more expensive than like your Ubiquity equipment, which was supposed to be way more affordable, really user-friendly. But we wanted to build a resilient network, and we were told, like, this is your carrier grade equipment. I mean, that's what you'd want. You'd want the best equipment that you could purchase. But again, we didn't know that this was their first build within that frequency. So again, there's been issues with it dropping service, or the BBU sectors being overloaded, which causes a reboot. So there are so many technical things that happened that caused, I would say, public mistrust and frustration with our company, which is really hard because we put so much into this. And you're doing this at a time where, like, internet access is critical. So this is during the time where people are still using online lessons at school. There's no in-person school. People are having to work from home. Half the departments were shut down for being quote unquote non-essential. So they were supposed to work from home. So we're like right smack in the middle of this pandemic, and we're still having these issues. And they're like, what are you talking about? We gave you $1 million, So that was a really tough lesson, and we're still kind of going through that in a way. So now we're kind of exploring these micro pops that I talked about, because we don't have the issue with the 5 gigahertz frequency. It's really within the 2.5, but we need the 2.5 for like the dense foliage areas. So you can't quite see it, but there's a whole slew of houses that are along this area. And they need that 2.5 to reach through those trees. So it's kind of a hard thing, because you need that frequency. But if there's issues with its like constant dropping, people have even said, just come get your equipment, and it's just not working. Or sometimes they're like, yeah, it works great when it works, but it keeps starting and stopping. So these are some of the hard lessons of running an internet service provider. We are working towards fiber as the goal, but that's probably several years out.
Yeah. So there's so much more to get into. There's like so much more. I do want to have like a longer conversation that is about how you are managing your relationship with both California state entities and federal entities. Like, how do you push back and give them feedback and be like, these were some of the things that you wish you had known about tribal priority window for one, for instance. But for now, I think it would be really helpful if you can so it feels like the work is hard because the work is hard. The work is hard because there's the topography is difficult, there's dense foliage, and it's just a difficult place to wire. What would you say makes it even harder? Like, is that a silly question? It feels like there are some obstacles that would be there regardless, but then there feels like there are additional obstacles that you face that could be addressed, that those are like man-made obstacles that we could talk about.
Right. Some of the other obstacles is that some people can't afford the internet. There's also multiple different types of homes in this area. So you might have someone that lives out of a HUD home, which is kind of like this stick-built home. And then you have these older trailers, and then sometimes people are living in camper trailers. So I think also when they go to each install, like every single one is different. So we've decided to do like site surveys prior to that, to go look at the home, see what kind of frequency they're going to get, see where to place it on the home, which can best, support the frequency, and then go back and actually do the install. I think it's harder in a low income, disadvantaged community, if you will. There's a lot of unemployment here, with it being rural in nature. The largest employer would be the tribe. It's not like there's private businesses here that, offer other employment opportunities. So largely it's people not being able to pay for the service, which is part of the reason why the grant funding will help, especially when it's like a forced need. So like these kids need to have internet now. The school district actually worked with, I want to say it was Verizon or AT&T, and they gave out these little hotspots to all the kids. And what they didn't realize was that Verizon and AT&T only have one point of distribution right here. So if people live all throughout the valley, maybe if you had line of sight, you could get service. But there's whole sections that live up in here and all the nooks and crannies that don't have line of sight. So when the school district went to test their signal strength, sometimes it was like they weren't even getting any type of signal. So they tried to provide solutions, but with this being the only distribution point, it largely left out a lot of people who couldn't get on to like a streaming Zoom meeting for school. Yeah. So that was a hard issue.
Yeah. I think the last question I had for you for now, sorry, do you have to go?
No.
Okay. The last question I had for you for now is like, what advice would you give to a different tribe that was just contemplating taking on broadband work right now?
My advice to them would be to, if they don't have all of the technical expertise in-house, I would suggest that they find a trustworthy consultant that could help guide along the way. Because there are so many steps that it would take to, contemplate if they wanted to take this on. They would need to know, what kind of options they have to get internet into their reservation. Is that wireless? Maybe they do have fiber nearby. Do they have the staffing? Do they have the office space? Do they have, one thing about public utilities is that we already know how many houses there are because we already serve them all water. So we kind of are their provider for utilities anyway. We also serve some of the tribal departments with with power through our Whopper agreement. And then we also manage the solid waste component. So we know how much kind of influx and customer capacity that we need. So we're used to being a customer service-based entity anyway. So they need to see where, if they were going to develop that, where would the internet fit? Because if they don't already have a department, it has to live somewhere. Is it going to be its own independent entity? And with that becomes all of the office space, the electricity, the water, the overhead costs, the staffing, the training that's needed. Are they going to need to be tower climbers? Do they need, certifications before they even start? Do they have installation vehicles? Things like ladders and tools and proper training. So we do have some towers in the valley. So we're going to get our employees certified, to be proper towers, because you first want safety. Another thing that we're considering is that if we are going to build out fiber, we would like to train our own techs and our own tribal members here. But we also need things like bucket trucks and maybe splicing vans in the future. So I think tribes need to realize that there needs to be kind of a huge initial investment, whether that's through grant funding, or if it can't be grant funding for all, the tribe might have to kick in some money and realize that that investment will take time to be realized.
Yeah.
So if I could have prepared my tribal council better and say, I understand that you are giving us, quite a large amount of money. This is how we're going to invest it. Just realize it might take us a year, to get fully operational. Please be patient. Because there's glitches, like I told you, with equipment and software that you can't anticipate. And I think you need to be communicative with them and manage their expectations.
Yeah.
Which I wish we had done a little more, because what people will do is they'll reach out to their elected officials and say, hey, I'm not getting the service I need. And then it creates this big, huge issue. But again, back to the advice, tribes are going to need strong consultants that they trust, someone that's going to be there, someone that is going to be help identify, how this is going to work, how it's going to be set up, what media are you going to use? Is it wireless? Is it fiber? Is it a combination of both, like us? How are we going to get the internet speed in here? Who are your available providers? Pricing out everything. And one other huge thing on this is the financial projections, which is a whole different other type of expertise that you're going to need, because there's a lot of overhead costs with this. But I think if you know that up front, you're better prepared to sell that or to request or go after that budget. But you need to know all of your costs.
Okay. Linnea, this has been fantastic. Is there anything that you wanted to touch base about, to talk about right now? Because what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to stop recording.